Listen, okay, before we even get started, I know, Harpies are fine right now. This isn't me saying that Harpies need a buff. That's not what this video is about. Hey, it's me, so welcome back to the Harpie 101 series. It's a series where I go in depth on different archetypes and decks that we have in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, and we're currently talking about the Harpie archetype. Now, Harpies have a strong place in the current meta. They are powerful. They are top tier right now. However, the archetype does still have weaknesses. You can be top tier and still have exploitable weaknesses, as we've talked about in the how to counter Harpie section of the 101 series. With those weaknesses having been highlighted in this video, I hope to suggest things that could fix those weaknesses and also consider support that they could get from the TCG. Maybe not now, but say they get power crept in the future. I don't expect more Harpie support in the immediate though. In the how to counter Harpies video, I talk about the name effect, which is just a state of being that pretty much all the Harpie cards have, where they are treated as having the name Harpie Lady in the graveyard, on the field, and some of them even in the deck. Now, that's a strength because it means that all of the archetypal support works with pretty much all of the cards. However, it's a weakness in the sense that cards like Karma Cut, Heraldry Patriarch, you know, the XYZ monster, they can exploit the name effect and shut your deck down in a lot of different situations. Now, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but one thing that I think the deck could definitely use is an archetypal monster, archetypal support that doesn't get the name Harpie Lady, actual good support, not like Harpie Dancer. I don't think that gets the name. Even if it does, it doesn't matter. Don't play that card. Another slight hole in the strategy is the fact that they don't really have any protection and or floating that comes with the archetype. Cyber / Harpie Lady, if destroyed, is destroyed, right? She doesn't protect herself. You have to do it with additional back row, which isn't that hard to do, but if you're using a card like Swallow's Nest in order to dodge back row, well, you don't want to tribute the boss monster that you just put in all of that effort to summon, right? So that's not really great. The only real good protection is Lance that I see a lot of people using in Harpies, but even with that, a little bit of recovery in case your monster gets destroyed might be nice. Now, the deck already has tons and tons and tons of card recovery, but as we've seen, that's not enough to necessarily make you the best deck in any given format. They are a very good deck in the current format, but having tons of cards in your hand doesn't guarantee you will win if you can't necessarily use all of them. It's a weird perspective to take, and I get it if you don't agree with me that having that kind of draw power just isn't broken, but like I don't think that having that draw power outright wins you the game. I think of this as an alternative recovery option is kind of what I'm envisioning, having that draw power to recover your card advantage, but also having your monster recovery, you know, your board presence being able to be recovered should it be lost. So those are two things that I think would really boost the Harpie archetype. Let's look at the TCG cards that they have that aren't currently released that I think might be able to help solve those problems. Before we actually get to the cards though, there's one thing I wanted to talk about, and it's a speed duel skill called Flight of the Harpies. Now, if you lose 1,800 or more life points, you can activate this skill during your next draw phase. During your draw phase, you can search your deck for a Harpie card, reveal it to your opponent, and add it to your hand instead of drawing. Now, why I think that this is something that we could get is because we are moving further and further away from generic skills, right? The level augmentations of yesteryear are being phased out, and various decks are getting character-specific skills. My Valentine used Harpies in the anime. This is something I could realistically see her getting, right? This would help actually with a less prevalent problem in that there's a lot of cards in this deck, and it's not the hardest thing in the world to break. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. And so this would help to, you know, substitute, get things going when you don't open the way you necessarily want to. It having a substantial life point cost means that it can't really be abused. And it also isn't as broken as something like Destiny Draw, which we already have, which lets you choose any card in the entire deck. You can only choose a Harpie card. So I feel like that's balanced. Now, getting to the actual cards, the first thing I want to talk about is Harpie's Pet Phantasmal Dragon. It is a rank 4 XYZ monster. It requires 3 level 4 wind monsters, so it is very specific to this archetype. They do have the potential to get 3 monsters on the field relatively easily. This card's effects can only be applied while it has an XYZ material. It can attack your opponent opponent directly, and your opponent cannot target any Harpie monsters with effects or for attacks. Now, during each of your end phases, detach one material from this card. I love this card because, like I said, if it were to be put in the game, it would help to solve the issue of all of the cards having the name Harpie Lady. Now, you would have to get into this card before something like Patriarch was used to make it viable, but if you manage to get into it, then you are protected. And speaking of protection, not being targetable is really, really nice. So you would have to decide, okay, do I make this first on my first turn with using Elegant Egotist and going into this big monster, or do I go into my Cyber/Harpie Lady and get offensive, start bouncing cards back? Because I don't think many Harpie players in most situations would be able to get 3 monsters on the field and then get another 2 monsters on the field in order to go into Cyber/ and this card. It would have to be a turn-by-turn thing, and there's more decision making in that, and I really like that. I don't think that this would be necessarily broken, especially because it only has the effect to protect you from targeting for 3 turns, because each turn you have to detach one material from this card, and if you choose to go into this card on turn 1, then by the time the next turn rolls around, Harpies would only be protected from targeting on the next 2 turns. So you only have 2 turns of being protected from targeting in reality, which I think is relatively fair. Don't get me wrong, this card would be very strong, but I genuinely see this as being somewhat realistic. If the metagame just gets slightly stronger, right? If they get power crept just a little bit, I could see the headroom being there for this to just make its way into the game. So I would love to see something like this. It also kind of helps with the other problem that I had talked about in them not having any floating. Well, if they don't float, well, at least they have protection in the form of this card. They can't be targeted by card effects. So that would be really, really nice. And they can't be targeted for attacks. However, things like Lightning Vortex, which you already have, would still work just fine on them. This card isn't given that exact same protection, so you could get rid of this card and then get rid of the Harpie. This doesn't seem very broken in my opinion. It's a big resource investment and it would do the deck some good. Still on the note of recovery and protection and that kind of thing, you have Alluring Mirror Split. Now, when a Harpie Lady or Harpie Lady sister you control is destroyed by battle, you can special summon one Harpie monster from your deck with a different original name than the destroyed monster. If this card you control is destroyed either by a Harpie effect or by your opponent's card effect, target one Harpie monster in your graveyard, special summon it. You can only use each effect once per turn. This is Floating Incarnate, basically. It gives Harpies an avenue to extend plays, and if they get destroyed specifically by battle, to be able to come back. Somewhat like what Noble Knights were able to do using King Artorigus to then float into one of the monsters that's in your graveyard. It's somewhat like that, but it's not inherent to the monster. Cyber/ still can't do it on her own. This card has to be on the field in order to use this effect, and it's literally just a recovery card. There's no other advantage that they would gain from this, which helps to balance it. And also, if you destroy the Harpie monster in a different way, or if you just remove them from the field in a different way, then this effect does not proc. Your opponent would have to play into this card to destroy it for you in order to proc the other form of special summon, unless you have a Harpie card, and specifically a Harpie card that you can use to destroy it yourself. So that starts to make the Harpie's hunting ground skill a bit more viable, doesn't it? So now there's a lot more decision making when it comes to the deck building, and now you have at least a little bit of floating and recovery should things go wrong, rather than having to set up from scratch. Again, they don't need it that much because they're able to recover their card advantage relatively well, but board presence is just as important as card advantage. So again, should they be power crept a bit, I could definitely see room for this card to exist. Even if they don't, to be honest, this card isn't that broken. It only really procs if either you destroy them by battle, which you don't have to, or if this card itself gets destroyed, which again, Cosmic Cyclone, or just leave it alone and force them to waste their resources to destroy it themselves. So those are 2 cards that I think could realistically be added into the game that would provide a meaningful but not overwhelming boost to the Harpie archetype. There are other cards in the TCG that they have as support, like Harpie's Feather Storm, for instance, but I do not think we would realistically get that. It's basically a hand trap that negates all of your opponent's monster effects on the field for a turn, and no, they don't need that. No, stay away. Anyway, So yeah, those are my thoughts on how you would boost the Harpie archetype. Please, if you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions, leave them in the comment. I'm really bad at this. Also consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel, and we have a little bit further to go in the Harpie 101 series, so stick around for that journey. Thank you for your time. I've been Saul. I hope you've been entertained and informed, and bye.